In the beginning, before the world had even taken shape, there existed a time of creation, an era where the Valar, mighty beings of immense power, worked together under the guidance of Eru Ilúvatar, the supreme creator. But among them, there was one who stood apart, Melkor, a being of unfathomable ambition. Melkor was not content with simply existing in harmony with the world. No, he sought to shape it, to control it, to make it his own. In the early days of Arda, Melkor was powerful, rivaling his fellow Valar. He was revered for his strength and intelligence, but beneath his brilliance lurked something darker, an insatiable desire to impose his will upon the world. His brother Manwë, the leader of the Valar, sought balance and order, while Melkor craved domination. This drive to control would ultimately be his undoing, for there was one thing he could never bear: the fact that Eru Ilúvatar, the creator of all things, held ultimate power over Arda. This was something Melkor could not accept, and so he turned against the very world he had once sought to shape. Melkor's journey into darkness was not a slow fall, but a violent break from the light. He sought to create life that could rival Eru's, but all of his attempts were twisted, corrupt. In his arrogance, he believed that if it wasn't his creation, it was worthless. His descent was marked by one thing: destruction. Melkor's heart grew cold with hatred, not just for Eru, but for all life that existed outside of his control. His actions became increasingly irrational, fueled by a consuming rage. He wasn't just an agent of chaos, he was chaos itself. But Morgoth's lust for power wasn't satisfied by mere destruction. The creatures he had made, his own servants, he treated with the same disdain. He showed them no mercy, and his cruelty was boundless. When they failed him, he discarded them as easily as he did everything else. Morgoth's need to destroy was not driven by logic, but by pure emotion, rage, envy, and pride. Everything, even his own creations, were cast aside in his pursuit of chaos. And yet, for all his power, Morgoth could not create what he desired most: true life. In his frustration, he tried to tear down the very fabric of reality, but it was beyond his grasp. His war against existence itself, fueled by his inability to create or control, led him into a spiral of madness. Morgoth became a force of pure destruction, leaving nothing but ruin in his wake. But Morgoth was not alone in his darkness. There was one who would rise from the shadows, a servant who would ultimately inherit his mantle: Sauron. Sauron, who once served a different master, would become the true heir to Morgoth's vision of domination. Sauron's rise was inevitable, but what made his ambition even more chilling than Morgoth's? Keep reading as we delve into the mind of Sauron and uncover the strategies and cunning that made him the Dark Lord of Middle-earth. In this introduction, we've explored Morgoth's twisted journey from a being of creation to one of pure destruction. His anger, born from his inability to control or create, laid the foundation for all the chaos that followed. But while Morgoth was an embodiment of chaos, his legacy would give birth to a far more calculating and dangerous force: Sauron. To understand Sauron's true nature, we must examine how his ambition differed from Morgoth's and how he would ultimately rise to power in the shadow of his predecessor's downfall. While Morgoth was consumed by the chaos of destruction, there was another, more patient force waiting in the wings. Sauron, once a servant of Aulë, the Valar of craft and smithing, had been a being of great talent and intellect. In his early days, Sauron had been a lover of order, a master craftsman who appreciated the elegance of structure and the efficiency of well-designed systems. He did not share Morgoth's hunger for destruction. Instead, Sauron sought something different, a perfect, organized world, one where he could impose control and bring order to the chaos Morgoth had left in his wake. But like many before him, Sauron's desire for order would lead him down a dark path. Morgoth, seeing the potential in Sauron, corrupted him, twisting his natural abilities and bending his mind to the service of darkness. Morgoth was no longer just a destroyer, he became a teacher, and Sauron, the perfect student. Under Morgoth's tutelage, Sauron learned how to manipulate, to plan, to control. He learned the art of subjugating others, not through sheer force, but through the promise of a world that could be ruled with an iron fist. Sauron's belief in order and structure made him an ideal lieutenant for Morgoth. While Morgoth raged and destroyed in a frenzy of chaos, Sauron worked behind the scenes, methodically building an empire. Morgoth's influence over him was like a blacksmith shaping metal, slow, deliberate, and unyielding. Where Morgoth's actions were impulsive and reckless, Sauron's were patient and calculated. The turning point came when Morgoth was finally defeated. After centuries of war and chaos, the Valar, the godlike beings, intervened and cast Morgoth into the void. But while Morgoth's physical form was cast out, his legacy lingered, and Sauron, his most trusted lieutenant, rose to take his place. Morgoth may have been banished, but Sauron was far from defeated. Sauron's first move after his master's fall was to solidify his control over Middle-earth. He knew that Morgoth's defeat had created a vacuum, a moment of instability that could be exploited. Morgoth's chaos had left the world broken, and Sauron, with his obsession for order, was determined to rebuild it, but on his terms. He understood that to rule effectively, he needed the cooperation of the powerful beings who had once fought against his master. This led to the forging of the Rings of Power, a masterstroke of manipulation and cunning. Sauron, pretending to be an ally, presented the rings to the elves, dwarves, and men as gifts. These rings, crafted with Sauron's own dark power, were meant to give their wearers great strength and influence. But beneath the surface, the rings were a tool, a means to control those who would wear them. As the elves, dwarves, and men took the rings, Sauron's influence grew, but so did the resistance against him. The elves, suspicious of his intentions, kept their rings hidden, and when Sauron's true plan was revealed, that he had forged a master ring, the One Ring, which would control all the other rings and their bearers, his enemies rose up against him. The downfall of Númenor marked a key chapter in Sauron's history. When the Númenorians, once his allies, turned against him, Sauron's rage boiled over. He twisted their desire for immortality, offering them the promise of eternal life if they would bend to his will. The destruction of Númenor, a mighty kingdom of men, was Sauron's punishment for their defiance, a perfect example of his calculating cruelty. He had turned their greatest desire into their ultimate downfall. Sauron's desire to control was not just about power, it was about domination, about bending every corner of Middle-earth to his will. His control over the Rings of Power allowed him to extend his reach across vast distances, to dominate kingdoms and minds alike. But Sauron was no fool. He understood that power alone was not enough to maintain control. He needed loyalty, and loyalty was not something that could be obtained through brute force alone. Sauron's skill in manipulation and his deep understanding of the minds of those he sought to control became his greatest weapons. He preyed on the fears, desires, and weaknesses of his enemies, twisting them to his advantage. His greatest strength was his patience. He was willing to wait centuries to make his move, to build his empire in the shadows until the time was right. But even the most patient of strategists can be undone. What happened when Sauron's pride finally led him to make his greatest mistake? The rise of the last alliance was a moment of reckoning for Sauron, one he had not fully anticipated. Stay with us as we explore the downfall of Sauron and how his obsession with power ultimately became his undoing. Sauron's path was one of meticulous planning and manipulation. While Morgoth's chaos was destructive, Sauron's tyranny was subtle and far-reaching. The rings of power were his tools, his long-term plan to dominate all of Middle-earth. Yet, as we saw, no amount of patience or cunning could ever truly prepare Sauron for the growing resistance against him, an alliance of forces he had underestimated. For centuries, Sauron's power grew, a quiet storm that stretched across Middle-earth like an endless shadow. His influence seeped into every corner of the world, from the deepest caves of Moria to the high towers of Mordor. Through the rings of power, Sauron could command those who bore them. His creation, his dominion, spreading his dark will over the free peoples, bending them to his cause, piece by piece. But power, as Sauron had learned, breeds its own contradictions. The very tools he had crafted to control others, those who wore the rings, became the seeds of his undoing. The One Ring, forged in the fires of Mount Doom, was not just the key to ruling the other rings, it was the essence of his will, a manifestation of his dark power. But the One Ring, like all things crafted in darkness, was a double-edged sword. Sauron could control the rings, yes, but he also had to maintain control over the ring itself. And it was this obsession with the ring that ultimately led to his downfall. The elves, dwarves, and men had all resisted him in varying degrees, and the wars of the Second Age culminated in the formation of a last alliance, an alliance of the free peoples united for the first time against the growing tide of Sauron's dominion. The armies of elves and men, led by Elendil and Gil-galad, marched upon Mordor. Sauron, confident in his power, watched as the forces of his enemies gathered at the very gates of his stronghold. But there was something that Sauron failed to consider: the strength of unity. For all his cunning, Sauron had underestimated the resolve of those he sought to conquer. The alliance of elves and men, forged in the fires of desperation, was a force unlike any Sauron had faced. The wisdom of the elves and the might of Númenor combined was more than just an army. It was a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope that burned brighter than anything Sauron had ever encountered. The battle before the Black Gate of Mordor was fierce, and the forces of Sauron, while numerous, were not invincible. Elendil, the High King of Númenor, and Gil-galad, the last of the great elven kings, fought valiantly but were ultimately struck down in battle by Sauron himself. For a moment, it seemed as if the Dark Lord had triumphed once more, but fate had other plans. As Sauron reveled in his apparent victory, he faced his final challenge: Isildur, the son of Elendil, who had fought at his father's side. In the chaos of battle, Isildur seized the opportunity to strike. With his father and the elven king slain, Isildur took the very ring that Sauron had so carefully crafted to control the world. In an act of defiance, Isildur took the ring for himself, and in doing so, doomed Sauron's reign. Sauron's power, which had been so thoroughly invested in the One Ring, faltered. As Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's finger, the Dark Lord's form was destroyed, and his body, once immortal, was reduced to nothing more than an echo in the wind. For a time, Sauron was no more than a shadow, a fleeting presence that could not touch the world he had so carefully shaped. But Sauron's story did not end there. The ring, though severed from its master, had a will of its own, and it sought to return to its rightful owner. It was only a matter of time before Sauron's malice would rise once more, for the ring was never truly destroyed. It merely waited, hidden, for the right moment to corrupt once more. As we reflect on Sauron's fall, we see that his undoing wasn't simply the result of a single blow. It was the culmination of his own hubris, his obsession with the ring, and his inability to understand the unity that could oppose him. Sauron had underestimated the strength of those who resisted him, believing that his patience and cunning would always win the day. But in the end, it was his pride and his reliance on a single source of power, the One Ring, that led to his defeat. Sauron's fall marked the end of the Second Age, but it also paved the way for the Third Age, a time where the shadow of Sauron would loom large once more. The ring, lost in the ravines of time, would continue to haunt Middle-earth, awaiting its moment to rise again. Would Sauron's power ever truly be broken, or was his influence destined to return, rising from the ashes once more? The story isn't over yet. To understand the final battle between good and evil, we must follow the ring's journey as it falls into the hands of a new bearer, one who will challenge Sauron's return in ways that will change Middle-earth forever. Stay with us as we move into the final chapter, where the true nature of the One Ring is revealed. In this chapter, we explored Sauron's fall, showing how his reliance on the One Ring was both his greatest strength and his ultimate weakness. His hubris led him to underestimate the strength of his enemies, and the last alliance, despite its leaders' deaths, shattered his power for good. But as we know, true evil is never truly defeated. It merely waits, biding its time for the opportunity to rise again. For 1,000 years, the shadow of Sauron's power faded from the world. The Dark Lord, once a terrifying force who had nearly brought all of Middle-earth under his cruel dominion, was reduced to a whisper in the wind. The One Ring lay lost, hidden from all who sought it, and for a time, the free peoples of Middle-earth believed that the darkness was gone. But evil, as it often does not disappear so easily. The Third Age began with the hope of a new era, one without Sauron's malevolent presence. But in the quiet corners of Middle-earth, whispers of his return began to spread. The ring, though lost for ages, had not forgotten its master. It had survived, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to surface once more. It was here, in the humble land of the Shire, that the ring would find a new bearer, one who was not chosen, but stumbled into its power by sheer accident. The story of Frodo Baggins, the unassuming hobbit from the peaceful land of the Shire, marks the beginning of the end for Sauron. It is a tale of unlikely heroes and impossible odds. Frodo, entrusted with the One Ring by his uncle Bilbo, sets off on a journey that would carry him into the heart of darkness itself. Alongside his companions, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and the wise wizard Gandalf, Frodo is tasked with destroying the very object that had given Sauron his power and nearly enslaved all of Middle-earth. The journey is long and fraught with peril. They travel through forests of ancient trees, across vast mountains, and into the heart of Mordor, where the fires of Mount Doom rage, where the ring was forged. Along the way, they are pursued by Sauron's forces, the terrible ringwraiths, who seek to reclaim the ring for their master. But the deeper they travel into darkness, the more they realize the true weight of their mission. The One Ring is not just a tool of power, it is a weapon of corruption, one that slowly bends the will of anyone who carries it. Frodo, despite his bravery, feels the pull of the ring. It begins to corrupt him, much as it had corrupted Sauron, bending his mind and soul with its insidious whispers. As the journey grows more dangerous, Frodo's strength falters. The ring calls to him, urging him to claim its power, to give in to its temptation. But Frodo, guided by his friends and his own indomitable spirit, continues forward. And though the task may seem impossible, Frodo never gives up hope. In the end, it is not Frodo alone who destroys the ring, it is Gollum, the creature who had once been consumed by the ring's power, that plays the final, unexpected role. Gollum, in his madness, takes the ring from Frodo at the very edge of Mount Doom. But in his desperate desire to possess the ring once more, Gollum falls into the fires of the volcano, and the ring is destroyed, along with Sauron's ability to return. Sauron's power, which had lingered for millennia, was finally shattered. His form, once mighty and terrible, crumbled as the ring was destroyed. The Dark Lord, whose ambitions had caused so much suffering, vanished into nothingness. His reign ended not by a battle of armies, but by the unexpected bravery of a humble hobbit and the unrelenting strength of friendship. The world that Sauron had sought to control was freed, and Middle-earth would never be the same again. The end of Sauron's reign, however, is not the end of the story. The legacy of the ring, the lessons learned through its destruction, and the triumph of good over evil continue to shape Middle-earth. Frodo's journey, though it ended in victory, left him scarred. The power of the ring, the weight of his burden, had taken its toll on him. His return to the Shire, once a place of peace, was never the same. Frodo, and all who had journeyed with him, had changed, forever marked by the trials they had faced. And so, while Sauron's physical form was vanquished, his influence lived on in the hearts of those who had been touched by his evil. The scars of his reign would never fully fade, yet there was hope. For though Sauron had sought to bend the world to his will, it was the courage and resilience of ordinary people, those without great power or ambition, that had brought an end to his tyranny. In the end, it was the simplest of virtues, hope, friendship, and sacrifice, that proved to be Sauron's undoing. As we close this chapter, we reflect on the enduring power of choice. Sauron's fall was not simply a result of fate. It was the consequence of countless choices made by countless individuals, each one resisting the temptation of power, each one fighting against the darkness. And so, the lesson of Sauron's story remains. Even in the face of overwhelming evil, the light of hope can shine through, as long as there are those willing to stand against it. Thank you for reading. And remember, the true power lies not in domination or destruction, but in the courage to resist temptation and the strength to fight for what is right, no matter how small the person, no matter how impossible the task.